In the 6th century BCE, on the sun-drenched island of Lesbos, a woman named Sappho composed verses that would challenge the silence of history. While the world around her celebrated the triumphs of men and the glory of war, Sappho's heart and poetry were dedicated to a different flame, the profound and passionate love between women. Her voice was so singular and her talent so immense that the philosopher Plato would later crown her the Tenth Muse, recognizing that her intimate explorations of female desire were as essential as the divine arts themselves. To understand the magnitude of Sappho's impact, one must first look to the unique environment of the island of Lesbos. Situated in the northeastern Aegean, Lesbos was a crossroads of trade, culture, and ideas. In the 6th century BCE, it was a place of remarkable prosperity and intellectual freedom. Unlike the restrictive atmosphere of Athens, where women were largely confined to the shadows of the home, the Aeolian culture of Lesbos permitted women a level of social participation that was rare in the ancient world. In this vibrant setting, women formed their own social and religious circles. These groups, often centered around the worship of Aphrodite and the Muses, were spaces where music, dance, and poetry flourished. Sappho was the undisputed leader of such a circle in the city of Mytilene. She was not merely a poet, she was a teacher, a mentor, and a priestess of the arts. Her world was one of charis, grace and beauty, where the scent of frankincense, the sight of woven garlands, and the sound of the lyre created an atmosphere of heightened sensory experience. It was within this intimate, female-centered world that Sappho's genius found its breath. Before Sappho, Greek poetry was dominated by the epic. Poets like Homer sang of vast battlefields, the wrath of kings, and the intervention of the gods in human affairs. These were public stories, meant to reinforce the values of a warrior society. Sappho, however, staged a quiet revolution. She moved the focus of poetry from the battlefield to the bedroom, from the public square to the private heart. She pioneered the lyric style, poetry meant to be sung to the accompaniment of the lyre. This format required a different kind of language, more rhythmic, more personal, and more immediate. Sappho wrote in the Aeolic dialect, a melodic and archaic form of Greek that felt closer to the spoken word than the formal language of epic. She invented her own poetic meter, now known as the Sapphic stanza, a complex and beautiful rhythm that captured the rising and falling of emotional breath. Her subject matter was equally transformative. She spoke of the bittersweet nature of love, a word she is credited with coining. She recognized that love was not just a divine blessing, but a physical and psychological force that could shatter the soul. When she wrote of her desire for the women in her circle, women like Anactoria, Athis, and Gongola, she did so with a directness that remains shocking even today. She celebrated the curve of a neck, the brightness of a glance, and the way a woman's walk could be more beautiful than all the chariots of Lydia. One of the most profound aspects of Sappho's work is her description of the physical symptoms of love. In her most famous surviving fragment, known as Fragment 31, she describes the experience of watching a woman she loves talk and laugh with a man. The poem is a masterpiece of psychological realism. She does not just say she is jealous, she describes the total collapse of her physical being. For when I look at you, even for a moment, I can no longer speak. My tongue is broken, and a subtle fire suddenly runs beneath my skin. My eyes see nothing, and my ears roar. A cold sweat covers me, and a trembling seizes me all over. I am greener than grass, and it seems to me that I am little short of dying. This is the first time in Western literature that the physical sensation of erotic desire is mapped with such precision. Sappho identifies the racing heart, the loss of sight, and the cold sweat as the hallmarks of a love that is as much a biological event as an emotional one. By placing these feelings at the center of her art, she validated the female experience of desire, giving it a dignity and a power that had previously been reserved for the exploits of men. Despite her immense popularity in the ancient world, where her poems were memorized, her statues were erected, and her image was struck onto coins, Sappho's legacy faced a long and difficult journey. As the classical world gave way to the Christian era, her work began to be viewed through a different lens. The very themes that had made her famous, her explicit celebrations of love between women, became the reason for her suppression. In the medieval period, many of her volumes were lost or deliberately destroyed. religious authorities found her homoeroticism threatening to the established moral order. By the time of the Renaissance, only a handful of her poems remained intact, preserved mostly as quotations in the works of ancient grammarians who were more interested in her dialect than her desires. For centuries, Sappho was a ghost in the literary canon. She was praised as the greatest of poets, yet her actual words were missing. This led to a strange phenomenon where male scholars attempted to rehabilitate her image. They invented stories of her being a chaste schoolmistress, or most famously, created the myth of her jumping off a cliff for the love of a man named Phaon, a story that had no basis in her own poetry, but served to heterosexualize her legacy for a more conservative audience. The modern era brought a new wave of interest in Sappho, fueled by archaeological discoveries. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, excavations in the Egyptian town of Oxyrhynchus uncovered tattered scraps of papyrus used to wrap mummies or discarded in ancient rubbish heaps. Among these scraps were new fragments of Sappho's poetry. These new verses confirmed what many had long suspected. Her love for women was the central, undeniable theme of her life's work. It was during this same period that the word lesbian underwent its historic transformation. For over 2,000 years, lesbian had been a simple geographical term. It was a demonym used to describe anything or anyone from the island of Lesbos. A lesbian wine was a vintage from the island. A lesbian song was a specific musical style. However, as the field of sexology began to emerge in Europe, researchers like Richard von Krafft-Ebing and Havelock Ellis were looking for a scientific vocabulary to describe human sexuality. They wanted to move away from the judgmental language of the church and toward a more objective classification. When they sought a term for women who were attracted to other women, they turned to history's most famous example. Because Sappho was the most renowned figure from Lesbos, they adopted the island's name as a clinical label. This was a pivotal moment in linguistic history. The word lesbian was uprooted from its geographical context and planted into the soil of identity. What had once been a neutral description of a place became a permanent tribute to the themes of Sappho's poetry. The island of Lesbos was no longer just a location on a map. It became a symbol for a specific form of love. In the 20th century, the term lesbian moved from the clinical files of sexologists into the hands of the women it described. During the feminist and gay rights movements, women began to reclaim the word, stripping away its clinical and often negative connotations and replacing them with a sense of pride and community. In this reclamation, Sappho was once again the guiding light. She provided a historical lineage that stretched back to the very dawn of Western civilization. For women who felt isolated or new in their identity, Sappho was proof that their feelings were ancient, honored, and beautiful. The term Sapphic also saw a resurgence, used to describe a broader spectrum of female-centered desire and community. Writers and artists began to engage with Sappho's fragments in new ways. Because her work was so broken, it allowed for a kind of creative collaboration across time. Modern poets would fill in the blanks of her papyrus scraps, finding in her silence a space to project their own experiences. Sappho's broken tongue became a metaphor for the suppressed history of women's voices, and her survival, even in fragments, became a symbol of resilience. Today, Sappho's presence is felt more strongly than ever. She is taught in universities, her fragments are translated into major languages, and her name continues to be a touchstone for identity and art. She remains the 10th Muse because she did what the other 9 could not. She made the divine human. She took the abstract concept of love and gave it a body, a voice, and a home. Her legacy is a rare instance where the beauty of ancient poetry survived the passage of time to provide a name for a timeless form of love. Whether one uses the term Sapphic or lesbian, they are participating in a tradition that began on the shores of Mytilene over 2 millennia ago. Sappho's voice, though fragmented, remains clear. She speaks of the beauty of the moon, the scent of the violet, and the unbearable intensity of a woman's touch. In a world that would have preferred her to be silent, she sang. In a history that tried to erase her, she endured. Her story is a reminder that while empires fall and languages change, the truth of the heart and the names we give to our love can last forever. What do you think of the story of Sappho of Lesbos? Let us know in the comments below. Like and subscribe for more Sapphic videos.